Good day, everyone. I'm John, your moderator for this webinar. And I welcome everyone for today's webinar, which is Avoiding an Audit ADA and 504 Rules for Colleges. Now, I would like to introduce our presenter for today. Actually, he is my favorite speaker. I can say that. It's awesome. This webinar is awesome for me as well. So his name is Kent Sewer. Kent has 23 years of experience in the field of student assessment, prior learning, and academic success. So now I would like to hand over the floor back to our speaker. Over to you, Kent.
John, thank you very much. And I want to thank everyone who is joining us today. I know you have your choice of professional development and where you want to work with your webinars. So it's extremely happy to see that there's interest in this topic, because this topic has been something that's been an interest to me for a lot of years. What I'm going to give you is good information to avoid audits and to understand exactly what's needed for your colleges to avoid getting into trouble with the ADA. In terms of a roadmap, I think it's important to look at the areas that need to be covered in such a presentation. The first thing that I want to look at with you today is basically how the ADA and 504 relate to your institution. It's not always as simple as you might think it is. There's a lot of different layers that it's important that you and your staff be aware of. The next area, and I'm going to spend a lot of time on this because it's very fascinating in terms of case study, and that's analyzing Justice Department agreements. Agreements that are made between the Justice Department and schools to remedy past wrongs related to ADA violations. Next, we're going to look at some recurring issues that schools have had and unfortunately continually to have that might affect what happens if you ever are audited by the ADA. Then we're going to look at some examples of compliance and what reasonable accommodation is and how that can affect and help your students at your institution. And then lastly, I like to end on something that we can all take with us. Granted, we can take everything with us, but I want to look at some best practices that we all can learn in terms of safety and compliance that are going to make us better individuals and our institutions that much more better at serving all types of students. Ladies and gentlemen, we hear the ADA. We hear all the time, but what exactly is it? Very similar to Section 504, the Americans with Disabilities Act is simply civil rights legislation aimed at individuals with disabilities. How it's different than Section 504 of that particular plan is that ADA applies to just about every entity in the United States, regardless of whether it receives federal funds from the U.S. government or not. But ladies and gentlemen, in terms of Section 504 and exactly what is it, it too is civil rights legislation designed specifically for persons with disabilities. Now, if you look at what its intent is to keep something from happening that has happened in the past. And in this case, prohibiting discrimination against individuals who meet that legal and legislative definition of disability. It is applied to entities, again, that receive federal funding. But ladies and gentlemen, how does it relate to your specific institution, your college, your two-year institution, your public, your private, your four-year institution? Ladies and gentlemen, when you're dealing with ADA and 504, you're talking about two specific titles in relation. Now, because there are definite differences in how protections are given at the secondary and post-secondary level. Also, in terms of secondary education, look at the actual purpose of the work that goes into helping those particular children. Speaking of post-secondary education, ladies and gentlemen, in the news, there's been a lot of discussion about Justice Department agreements that are done to settle legal action regarding the federal government, the ADA, the Department of Education, and different types of institutions, public, private, secondary, and post-secondary. When you're looking at these specific agreements, you do run across things that you see consistently, and there are common, what I call common themes. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is one of the big specific cases you probably are familiar with, at least in name only, that has come out in the last several months. This is University of California at Berkeley. To dive a little further into the Berkeley situation, ladies and gentlemen. Now, ladies and gentlemen, part of the actual decree itself is that Berkeley is going to make all future and most of its existing online content accessible to people with disabilities. A more specific case relating to actual physical barrier, why are we here today? Well, I'm hoping that ADA audits are something that we all want to avoid. Ladies and gentlemen, in terms of recurring issues, I wanted to show you some numbers real quick from Higher Ed Dive to show how this is indeed a significant problem. How can we keep that from occurring? Self-assessment is a very key point of that. Of ADA and responsible accommodations, this is 42 USC, and you can see all the other numbers. Basically, this is federal law. This is one of the most important, I feel, parts of this particular presentation. And now, best practices. What can we do to ensure compliance and safety? With respect to actual instructional methods, and this goes back to faculty's understanding of 504 and ADA. In summary, I think the best thing to know about what we discussed today is that there are several things that we have known and continue to know that we don't always implement. But in terms of ADA, 504, and institutions, I hope that you've learned that there are so many things that affect your public, private, four-year or two-year institution. Those Justice Department agreements that we read through are things that happen all over the place. We saw the numbers, the number of complaints, the number of decrees. We looked at ADA audits and what to avoid. Hopefully we'll all know that there are things out there that we sometimes overlook, but we as administrators have to be aware of them. ADA compliance and reasonable accommodations. What's a reasonable accommodation? How can we meet those needs? How can we not try to do everything, how can we try to do everything but not always be completely equal? And then lastly, ladies and gentlemen, best practices for compliance and safety. Your checklists, making sure your web team knows all about 504 and also 508. Access to education is the most important aspect of any educational institution's mission, at least in my opinion. If this access is denied or even hindered, it can have serious legal and social impacts for your institution. That concludes today's presentation. Thank you all very, very much. So I want to thank everyone that's here today. I think it's important that we all understand that we all have a part in this. And I thank you all very much.